We now have a very important session for you on the future of United States Special Operations. We're lucky to have us with here General Richard Clarke, who's the commander of U.S. Special Operations Command. And of course, you know, our special ops are deployed all over the world. I think one article said in 70% of the world's countries, there are U.S. Special Ops forces, from Africa to the Middle East to Asia. These are the folks who are really on the front lines of keeping us safe, of working with local military forces. They've been at the front lines of counterterrorism, and General Clarke is a great leader of this group. So General Clarke and Michelle Flournoy, will you join me up here, please? Thank you. So as commander of U.S. Special Ops, General Clarke is responsible for the training and employment of all special operations forces, including the Navy SEALs, the Army Rangers, the Green Berets, the Marine Raiders, and the Air Commandos. He's been in the U.S. military for his entire career, but what we learned backstage is that he was also born in Germany and went to high school in Berlin, so near and dear to my heart, because that's where I'm from as well. And there's no one better to be in conversation with General Clarke than Michelle Flournoy, who is one of the great defense experts and great patriots that has been serving for us in the U.S. Pentagon. Most recently as Undersecretary of Defense for Policy from February 2009 to 2012. She, of course, is also the co-founder and managing partner of WestExec and the co-founder and CEO of the Center for New American Security. And really, no one knows more than these two about our mission. So we'll let you take it away. Thank you.
And a proud member of the Aspen Strategy Group. So there we go.
And a proud member of the Aspen Strategy Group. Thank you for adding that.
Thank you, Anya. Well, I have been looking forward to this. First, because I think this is a really fascinating and important topic. And second, is one of those rare instances where I get to ask questions of my dear friend, General Clarke. So, so great to see you all today. So I want to start with some kind of setting the scene. You know, we all talk about a paradigm shift, 20 years since 9/11. We've had a focus on counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, Afghanistan, Iraq, the broader counterterrorism fight. And now we're really in a new situation where we've got the rise of China and other powers. We've got this, as we were hearing in the previous panel, a period of profound technological disruption. So I wanted to just give you an open-ended question about how do you see the security environment today in contrast to the last 20 years, and you know, in terms of how we need to be thinking about special operations.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, and Anya, thanks for the introduction. And Michelle, like you said about me, but I pay it back. You've been a great leader for inside the Pentagon and for national security. It's an honor to be here with you. First, I think it is important to talk about where we've been and what we've learned from it. And you know, the past 20 years for our force that's been heavily involved in the counterterrorism fight and the counter-violent extremist fight, that shouldn't be forgotten. And we have now built over 20 years of battle-tested, great individuals who we especially selected and assessed. What I look at as probably one of the most credible, integrated, capable forces that we've ever had. And we should never throw that out. And we got to continue to learn from the things that took place and the missions that they accomplished to keep our nation safe. So what I think in the security environment in which we go forward on, that the counterterrorism mission is still going to remain. There's still going to be folks that want to come into our country. There's still going to be folks that that would, if they had the opportunity, would take a shot at the United States. I'm not saying the next 9/11 is around the corner, but I do think that we always have to be vigilant and be prepared. So that's one thing that I think we got to keep to the forefront. And truthfully, General Milley was here yesterday, and he talked specifically about the counterterrorism aspect. But the other piece that I share with the audience, and it's the raison d'etre for SOCOM and how we got started, was for the crisis response. And that capability that we provide for our nation to really reduce the threats abroad, that we could actually respond, whether it's a hostage rescue mission, or whether it's reinforcement of an embassy, or whether it's counter proliferation that could take place if something's coming near us. I don't think we should ever discount the ability of special operations to respond quickly, to give our national decision makers a bit of a hedge and a bit of insurance. And with, for us, with only 2% of the total joint force is SOCOM, and about 3% of our budget, it's a pretty good return on investment in what you get. And even if I just go back within the last 90 days, when there were forces required for the Afghan retrograde that happened in short notice, SOF responded and gave options in Kabul. But what a lot of people don't realize is that while that mission in Afghanistan was ongoing, there was also an earthquake that took place in Haiti, and the force that responded in a humanitarian disaster was actually a Navy SEAL that was part of the Special Operations South that took a small cell, and he went to Haiti, and he provided capabilities. And so that ability to respond quickly, for whatever footprint is needed, is something that SOF can do.
Right. So we're all anticipating the new National Defense Strategy coming out. I'm not going to ask you to preview that before it's published, but it's very clear that it is going to focus on the rise of China as if not the primary challenge. And, the competition with China, particularly in the Indo-Pacific theater, but also more broadly. And so, as you think about that larger context as sort of part of the framework, if you will, or the framing context for the next 20 years, how does that change your thinking about the roles and missions for SOF? Are we sort of going back to the future from kind of SOF's origins in World War II and through the Cold War? How are you thinking about this for the roles and missions in the future?
Yeah, no, thanks. A couple big things that I think are worthy of looking at first. Having my last job in the Pentagon as the J5 and looking closely at the strategies that have come, I still remember General Dempsey. It was 4+1. It was China, yes, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and then it got refined to 2+2+1. And so I think your piece on it's really going to be 1+4 now, and China as a pacing threat, and the capabilities they're developing and the activities that they're undertaking, I don't think can be overstated. But to your point for SOF's role in that, in the competition space, a couple things is, but this is a little bit back to the future. The origins of SOF with everyone, I think most people who study history understand, Wild Bill Donovan, who stood up the USS, and what he did there with really the origins of SOF and the CIA, both intel collection but also discrete operations. And most people immediately point to the European theater. I think it's also instructive to look at the Pacific theater and things that took place by both General Donovan, but also other elements. And one thing as I look historically is everyone remembers what MacArthur said. When he left the Philippines, what did he say? I shall return. But very few people know the history of, at that time, Captain Major Russell Volkman, who, when MacArthur left the Philippines, he raised a guerrilla force of 22,000 Filipinos and fought an insurgency until the time MacArthur returned. And he then wrote a book that said, "We remained." And I think as you look at history of what SOF can do from an unconventional side, not just in the European theater, but into the Pacific theater, and wherever we're able to partner with like-minded individuals who have the same interest, and work resistance networks and build resilience within that. And at that time, Captain, and then subsequently Brigadier General Polkman, was really the emphasis of some of our Green Berets and our Special Forces. So as we look at this, and in competition as a continuum, and really a continuous campaign, it's not a phase, and it's not, you do competition, and then you have crisis, and then you have conflict. Competition is woven throughout this. So.
But you started by saying that even as the shift is happening, and you will be part of supporting that, it's not like the terrorism threat has gone away. It's not like some of the other challenges have gone away. So how, as SOCOM commander, how do you think about the trade-offs in balancing across, continuing a focus on counterterrorism where it's needed, but also freeing up more of your not just your people and your resources, but your mental bandwidth to really think about shaping the future vis-a-vis China?
It's great. And I'm glad you specifically used that word of balance, because we're, first and foremost, we're looking at the rebalance. And we have prioritized towards the counterterrorism fight for those threats. So we have to provide a sustainable priority towards the violent extremists, so that our country, our homeland, remains safe. So what I would say is that we've really looked hard at where the specific threats are, and we've really changed some of our operating models, where I can point back to 2009, 2010, 2011 when I was in SOCOM. There was network to defeat a network, and where anyone would raise their hand and say, "I'm a violent extremist," it'd be, "Let's send a team there. Let's make sure." And we don't necessarily need to put our forces everywhere. We need to put them where the threat is the largest, would be priority. But then we also need to look at other capabilities of our partners, of our allies, and where they can look at the violent extremist threats. But then as it looks to the capabilities in competition, as we've been able to really bring back some of the force, and really focus on a regional alignments for our elements that have cultural and have language expertise, and that can work in specific regions and go back there again and again and again. And I think that's really important for our force, with an emphasis not just on the direct action, but looking at all the core competencies that SOCOM provides. Because one of the biggest, and Michelle, I've heard you talk about this, most people, when they think about SOF, they immediately think about the direct action, counterterrorism, the
Kicking
things that,
down the door.
Right away. And so what I just focus is that SOF provides unconventional warfare. It provides foreign internal defense, security forces assistance, military information support operations, or PSYOPs, and civil affairs. When I get to travel and see our teams that are globally employed, and to see a Green Beret team that's co-located with the civil affairs team, that's co-located with the psychological operations team, and they're working inside an embassy to forward U.S. interests, I think that's what right starts to look like, and it's part of the competition.
Do you see, a migration back to more traditional division of labor? So, one of the demand was so high in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the broader thing. You end up having, SEALs, who are a maritime force, ending up, in landlocked countries, doing all kinds of, at a very high tempo of operations. But, you know, in this environment we're moving to, is part of the rebalance sort of re-emphasizing the advantage of Green Berets doing the work with partners and advise and assist, or SEALs in a more maritime environment missions? Or so do you think going back to that more traditional division makes sense, or are we still going to expect everybody to do everything?
No, I think going back to that more traditional is exactly where we are already moving to. You know, you bring up the SEALs as one example. You know, for a long time it was small s, big L, in the acronym of Sea, Air, Land.
Right.
And now we're getting the big S back in SEAL with an increased emphasis on maritime. But when you think about the SEALs in the maritime domain, what I think about, it's still not just a direct action or just working independently. I got to watch our SEALs a few months ago working with the Norwegian Special Operations Forces, building up their capabilities and capacity, and truthfully learning something from the Norwegian partners who are great in the maritime domain. So we're also learning and training. But we have SEALs working in the maritime domain with Ukrainian SOF, but also in the Philippines, in Thailand, and other places that are all maritime powers. And so it's that continued training.
Right. So let's talk about training a little bit, and education and training. So as you think about where you're trying to take the force in the future, does it change how you train people? Do we need to invest in more Mandarin speakers? Do we need to invest in more technologists who are going to do all the integration of the cool stuff that was talked about in the panel before? I mean, how do you think about educating and training the force?
Yeah, a couple things. First, on the actual training of our people. You mentioned Mandarin. Okay, nice. But how about Tagalog and Thai and all the partner regions? I'm more interested in our folks learning those languages and taking the time with culture and to become regionally affiliated. So when they are in another country, that they understand. And so it's gaining an understanding through education. That's sometimes higher level education, but sometimes it's just day in, day out training. And actually, their deployments is probably the best training that they get when they're actually deployed in that environment. But the more they can be attuned to the specific cultures in which they're working is one of the most important things. So there's a training part to that's really important. But then there's our special operations are part of a larger joint force. And also working with the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, and some of their higher end exercises, and making sure that we can show and work with and integrate with the joint force is absolutely critical, because we want them to see us as an enabler and a capable force that helps them, whether that's through joint force entry or because because we're already in a country. We may be the only ones in that country that we can provide them access and placement for the future. And I think that's really important. And then obviously our individuals learning how do we pull this all together, the technology and learning and higher education is absolutely critical.
So when we talk about new strategy, new focus, a lot of times we immediately go to the bells and whistles of the new technology, the new equipment, new procurement, and that's very important. But in my mind, the real long pole in the tent has always been operational concepts. How do you actually change how you're thinking about approaching a mission in a different environment with a different challenger, et cetera? And the process for doing that, because I think oftentimes, the Department of Defense is a very top-down, hierarchical, deductive organization. So you have the joint operational concept starts at, the joint staff level, works its way down. But a lot of times, the real intellectual ferment comes from the bottom up through a more competitive process where people are trying different approaches to solving specific problems. So as SOCOM commander, how do you think about the work that needs to be done on operational concepts, and how do you structure that effort or incentivize that effort so it's really productive?
Well, first, and I think you just hit, it starts with people. It starts with people. You got to bring the right people into the force, and then you absolutely have to empower the people, that their ideas will be accepted, that they'll be listened to, they'll be brought up. It's not lost on me that, Stan McChrystal, as he describes how he took on the entire, find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, and turned it into a man-hunting machine. That was a bottom-up. And pull together and refine. So we have to create really the leadership has to be attuned to and listen to those ideas, because the best ideas come out of necessity and come from being forward and employed. And so the more we can take what's required from the top of resources that the forces need, but then take the bottom up and then derive what those concepts to be, the better. And what we're looking at specifically in SOCOM is stealing a page from the Navy of actually coming up with key operational problems, and then taking in the best inputs from across our theater special operations commands and our service component, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine components to go, how do we solve this as a joint force?
Great. Well, maybe we can zero in on one particular problem, which is strengthening deterrence. If you are in Beijing at the moment and you turn on the nightly news, all you see is a narrative of U.S. decline. Look at January 6th, look at their mishandling of COVID, look at their, polarization, look, the failure of democracy, they're down, they're out, this is our moment. And in that environment, there's a real risk of, at some point, the leaders in Beijing kind of drinking their own Kool-Aid and thinking, okay, maybe we can take a risk and use military force to impose our will, be it in the East China Sea, the South China Sea, Taiwan, et cetera. So to me, the real watchword of the day is deterrence. How do we strengthen deterrence? And that's obviously a big question, way beyond SOF. But I'd love to hear you think out loud a little bit about when integrated deterrence is going to be a central portion of the new defense strategy. Secretary Austin's been talking about that a lot recently. How do we think about strengthening deterrence, and what's the role of SOF in that?
I think one of our roles is undermining an adversary's confidence. Undermining the adversary's confidence so that he or she does not believe that the things that they want to accomplish can be done so. And I think SOF can play a tremendous role, because you've studied deterrence, understand that much of it has to be in the mind of the opponent. And what SOF brings into that, I think, are several things. One, we're responsible for the Joint Force for Military Information Support Ops, the information ops. So what is out in that information space? What do our information operations professionals message? Everything from public to private. How do we ensure we're pointing it in the right directions for both our adversary, but then also to pull in partners and allies into the information space would be one. The other one is we as SOF, through strategic reconnaissance, through operation preparation of the environment, to have an understanding for what the adversary holds dear. And if they hold that dear, what can we hold at risk? And our adversaries, in some cases, are global. And so you don't necessarily have to hold something at risk inside their territory, inside their country. And I think as we look at SOF as a global combatant command against global adversaries, we're looking across the whole spectrum. And I think that's really important, that through our strategic reconnaissance, we can see what is important to them. We can see where other bases are, or where they may have, in some cases, paramilitary groups that are out working in the fringes that we can make sure that we call out and that we understand what activities they're doing.
When the Secretary talks about integrated deterrence, he obviously talks about all domains, so not only undersea, maritime, air, space, land, but cyberspace, space. But he's also been talking about integrated with allies and partners, as you noted. And one of my favorite recent SOCOM commander quotes was from your predecessor, Tony Thomas, who said, you know, our job working with partners in a place like Europe on frontline states is making the Baltics look like indigestible porcupines for the Russian bear. And I just love, so what does it look like to make, you know, ASEAN members or Taiwan an indigestible porcupine for the Chinese dragon, you know? But there's a very rich history of SOF working with partners in enhancing their own capacity to defend themselves, complicate adversary planning, and so forth. So can you talk a little bit about that dimension?
So Tony Thomas is great.
Yeah.
And I love him, and he has a way with words. And
Right.
so I think his description, everybody can envision that. But what was fantastic for me is just this past summer, I had the opportunity to visit the Baltics, to see what really Tony and even before him, his predecessor, have set in motion with really building resistance networks that we want an adversary to think that, you know, behind every rock is an IED, and behind, you know, inside, you know, up in every tree is a sniper. That if you were willing to attack this country, you're going to be fighting all the way through. And the Baltics is just one example. But that same building up resistance is really important in both the population, but also with the various forces. And we don't always necessarily work with the SOF forces. It could be paramilitary forces, it could be others. It's really dependent on what is best for that specific country. I mean, just next month, actually in 2 weeks, it's November now. In 2 weeks, I'm going to Europe to go specifically to a resistance and resilience conference that's being hosted there, you know, by our special operations, and bringing together some of the key interlocutors in really some of the concept development of this. I think the last thing I'll say on this, Michelle, is resistance you can understand, but I put a finer point on resilience. Because the resilience, it's the ability to take that punch and then get back up. And what we have found within SOF, one of the best ways to do that is actually through the medical aspect, that if someone knows that if they're going to be hurt, you know, wounded, something's going to happen, that the medical capabilities are there, they can be treated, and they're going to be taken care of. So as we build these networks, we put an incredible amount of emphasis on that training, those networks, where are the field hospitals going to be? Where are covered sites that they can all go to, and they'll know that they're there, and they know they'll be taken care of. And that builds the confidence. And once, you know, you give a force confidence that they can accomplish the mission and they'll be taken care of, you're going to have a well, you know, trained force, you know, that's willing to fight a little bit harder than some others.
Great. I'm going to switch gears and ask one more question myself, and then just put you all on notice. I'm going to open it up for the audience to be thinking of your questions for the general. So SOCOM has a great reputation, and I think it's pretty well deserved, for being very forward-leaning in its more agile approach to you know, demonstrating new technologies, prototyping, getting them into the hands of the operators, playing around with things, and then, you know, in many cases, very quickly fielding new technologies, new capabilities to the force. I think the larger department is really suffering with this problem of the valley of death, where, you know, you had, you know, Mike Brown up here, and DIU has done a great service in improving the department's ability, along with people like Doug Beck, to scout for new technologies and solutions. But we still have a really hard time going from there to adoption of innovation at speed and at scale. So what can we learn from the SOCOM experience? Granted, it's a much smaller, ecosystem, but are there things that we could import into the department that would be helpful?
People and partners. Some wise person told me if we want to develop our force, one, you got to bring the right people in, which we do through our assessment and selection process. But in some of the specific things we need, we're bringing in interns now during the summer months to help us with coding and AI. And we're bringing them in through some private organizations, but we're also bringing them through local colleges and others. But they come into our formation, work on problem for 4 months. I in-brief them and I out-brief them. When I in-brief them, I say, who wants to join SOCOM? Who wants to work for DoD beforehand? And usually I get nobody. When I out-brief them, and they got to work with our people, they got to solve some real-world problems. Usually the hands go up at the end and say, who wants to come? In fact, some of them we actually end up hiring. So you got to bring new people in, but we also trained our force. We held, and this is part of the partnership. I went to MIT 2 years ago, met with the dean of engineering from MIT, and said, where can we partner? He set up a course for 400 of our mid and senior grade officers to understand the basics of artificial intelligence and machine learning and data and what they had to do, so that neophytes like me and the rest of the force would start to grasp and not ask the dumb questions or waste the talented people's time. So that's part of the partnership. But then, Chris Lentz was just up here on stage from Rebellion. I met with Chris 2 weeks ago in Boston with his company, with a venture capitalist and a couple other companies, because we're always looking for partners of what's out there. And I'm constantly learning, but also with private industry, with academia. I went to MIT, but I also stopped by Harvard Business School and Tufts, and go out to Stanford, and Carnegie Mellon is a great partner with us. So try to pull in the best from across our country. And I'm just doing that at my level, but this is happening down in the formation with business, academia, and then truthfully some of the labs that are out there. They're not government. That we work with, whether it's Lincoln Labs or Draper Labs or Langer Labs, because they're developing some great technologies that can help us. So I think pulling that all together, and then then having our SOF acquisition team, and who comes with me on all those trips? Is our SOF acquisition executive to follow on and then make those connections to go, where can we go next?
And they've had to be retrained and incentivized differently too, to move more quickly
to
and
move
so
faster
forth.
to get things done. So.
All right, the floor is open. We're going to start right here, the young lady in the red sweater. Please tell us who you are, where you're from, and ask a question.
Great, thank you so much. I'm Tara Chandra. I am one of the rising leaders. I'm also a PhD candidate at UC Berkeley, and my dissertation studies insurgency and counterinsurgency, which by looking at this conference might be a little bit overshadowed by rising China, but I've just really appreciated your thoughts here. And I've kind of a two-part question. So you mentioned that there's a real importance of understanding local cultures, and I really appreciated especially your point about learning languages other than Mandarin and sort of engaging with local partners. And that's been a real cornerstone of the COIN doctrine, sort of as we have known it, or at least in my lifetime as I've known it. And I'm wondering if you could speak to kind of how that will be prioritized, and then also what you see the future of counterinsurgency doctrine looking like for the United States, given sort of a shift away from land operations and more towards kind of countering a rising great power. Thank you so much.
No, great. Did you, when I gave the Russell Folkman example, do you know who I was talking about? Okay, good. Now you can. I hope you can show your interest in that. No, it's an important question, and I think not just special operations, but our entire joint force has to still have capability for counterinsurgency, because it's not going to go away. And what I do think it's going to be where do we have to prioritize that effort depending upon U.S. national interest of where that is. And I do think that the Department of Defense did a great job by including an irregular warfare annex to the National Defense Strategy that helps pull some of that and identifies that it is not just SOCOM and Special Operations Forces that conduct COIN or conduct irregular warfare. So I hope I get your question.
Doug Beck. I was aiming for one of your fellows, but you raised your hand.
If you want to turn it to one of your fellows, you can.
No, I'm kidding.
So you already answered one of the questions I was going to ask, so I will pivot to a little bit different question that's tied to something that you didn't talk about. The Special Operations Force that we have today worldwide is unbelievable, bar none, and that is forged by 20 years of experience and an incredible amount of reps, and a talent base is just incredible. And at the root of that talent base is a culture that's incredibly powerful. So I guess the question I'd have for you is, as you think about that culture now and turning it to the challenges that you talked about that are emerging, which parts of that culture do you want to double down on, and which parts of it do you think might need to change to meet the new threats?
Hey, Doug, thanks. Good, and always great to see you. The culture that I never want us to let go of, and whether that's double down or triple down, is the fact that our individuals are problem solvers, and that they will continuously adapt and look for those problems to overcome. Because that's what I think that's really, as we sat down with all our commanders and talked about what's the SOF unique value to the joint force, it was that, and that we could quickly get to solutions and then also look at long-term solutions. I think the aspect of what do we want to, and I won't say get rid of it completely, but I think the thing we have to be careful of, because of the 20 years of engaged combat, that everyone starts to look at direct action as the only thing that we do, and I talked about that. But for a good part of that 20 years, that's what we also recruited to. That's what we also assessed to. That's what we also trained to. And when I came into the command, and I would go out to see our forces training and prepping, it was always the direct action mission that they were training to. It was what some of the assessment courses were built around. And I think we modified to that, but it's something we got to continue to take a look at. So.
Great. Yes, Charlie?
Sir, thank you very much for coming. Charlie Dunlap, retired Air Force officer, now teaching at Duke Law School. And I hope we add Duke to your list of visits. Sir, you might be aware that Jill Hazelton has written a book from the Naval War College, has written a book called Bullets, Not Ballots, where she challenges the whole notion that winning hearts and minds is a key to successful counterinsurgency. In fact, she studies 5 different counterinsurgencies, and she finds that the more brutal the counterinsurgents are, the more successful they are. And she probably could have added Sri Lanka and frankly Syria to that list. A, what do you think of that? And B, is SOCOM trying to grapple with that particular perspective? And I just want to add, for Jill's sake, she's not advocating that we become brutal, she's advocating that we not become involved. Thank you, sir.
No, I have not read that, so I'm a little bit of a disadvantage, but I still think that regardless, we have to go with our values. Obviously, we'll always go with the rule of law, and that we have to know the long-term implications to our forces and to the policy, and that we'll fall within that. So I understand the premise, but I still, I'm not the favor of brutality in all circumstances. We have to do what we have to do, but we're gonna do it within the comport of that rule of law and most importantly, our values. Because the moral injury that could come from a brutality is something that none of us want to have to live with.
Yes, right here.
I think there was one in the back.
Okay.
There's one in the way back. Okay.
Why don't we go here and then we'll go in the back?
Okay.
Yep. Yes.
Sure. George Nicholson, great to see you both again. And quick question, Michelle, is your son still in the SEALs? Oh.
I know nothing.
No comment.
I was at a breakfast last week with General Eric Smith, who is the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. And he talked about one of the commandants, and General Berger may speak to it on the next panel, is basically the recruitment of individuals. And he said training, what they've done down at Quantico, their new modeling and simulation center, to provide the basis for requirements. But then he said one of our highest priorities is retention. And he says, I've got people who've got 18 years of service. We've spent millions and millions of dollars on them, and they're getting out. And he says he's calling them in and saying, why are you getting out? Well, you know, I'm not going to get promoted to full colonel. I'm not going to be promoted to general officer. How do you keep those people? What initiatives? And he said, we're looking at, you know, what kind of changes in policy or doctrine. Are you having the same kinds of problems in SOCOM of retention?
Yeah. Honestly, George, I may have lagging indicator, but we're not. Our folks are still focused on the mission. Yeah, we lose some, but it is not significantly changed in the few years that I've been watching this. So we're not seeing it, George, because our people, I think, are enthused by the mission and the things that they get to do.
Right. I think there was somebody in the way back. Did I see a hand? Yes, back here. Sir, you can stand up.
Yeah.
And the mic will come to you.
Yes, thanks very much, Chris Isham. Question about our counterterrorist capabilities in Afghanistan. What did we lose with the withdrawal? And to what degree can that be compensated with over-the-horizon operations?
Yeah. I think that the biggest thing that we've lost with that is our intel, our actual ability to see and sense without having humans on the ground. And this, Michelle and I have talked about this, and that's the piece that is going to be the hardest to make up for. I won't say it's impossible, but it is going to remain a challenge to be able to see and sense where the various groups within Afghanistan, what they're doing and where they're going. It doesn't mean it's an impossible task, but it's going to be more challenging going forward.
Well, I can just say for myself, as an American taxpayer, I feel good that our Special Operations Forces are well led and in great hands. And please join me in thanking General Clarke for a great conversation.
My name is Nick Schifrin. I'm the Foreign Affairs and Defense Correspondent with PBS NewsHour, and it is my privilege to introduce General Rich Clarke, Commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, previously the Director of the Strategic Plans and Policy on the Joint Staff. He commanded the 82nd Airborne, spent 8 years in the 75th Ranger Regiment, including as regimental commander, deployed during Desert Shield, Desert Storm, 4 deployments to Afghanistan, 3 deployments to Iraq, from a military family born in Germany. West Point grad, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. Great to be here.
Our next panel is called The Next 9/11. So let's begin there. After 20 years of war, after the recent chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, are we safer or less safe than 20 years ago?
What I talk about, Nick, is the violent extremist threat that attacked us on 9/11 still exists. It's there. we can never, forget that. And I think what we have to do is be imaginative. We have to think about and continue to look at what could those threats be and make sure that we can, in fact, counter those threats wherever they may come from. And while Al-Qaeda was largely decimated in Afghanistan, and the ISIS caliphate in Iraq and Syria was defeated, the threat still exists. In fact, in some ways, it's metastasized. That it's actually harder to track. I think on the good side is we built an incredible coalition to defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and also in Afghanistan, and fought with some of the gentlemen that are in this audience and many of their special operations forces. I fought alongside with them, and those relationships that we built continue today and must continue. But I think the other positive side in this threat is we've also built within the U.S., and I think it extends to our allies, is an incredible partnership to look within the interagency and sharing with other nations about this threat. And for us, as we look at the threat, the most important part is the intelligence collection so we can understand and see where that threat could emanate from. So we're, in some ways, we're better off because we built this, but in other ways we have to continue to see where that threat is metastasized and prioritize that threat where it is strongest.
For a while after 9/11, special operations forces were deployed. It almost seemed like almost everywhere that a militant group was operating. At least that was some of the policymakers' decision. That shifted a little while ago, about 10 years ago or so. Why did the threshold change for where we deployed special operators? And what is that threshold now? Is it a little bit more precise, less about militant groups and more about groups specifically that can threaten the mainland?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I put it, we got to prioritize. And you hit exactly where we were at a certain point after 9/11. If any group raised their hand and said, I'm part of Al-Qaeda, and then subsequent, I'm part of ISIS, we generally would send special operations teams to that location to try to disrupt or defeat, and found that that's not a sustainable approach. What we have to do is work with allies and particularly indigenous partners from that region to actually defeat that threat and try to contain it inside their borders so that it doesn't in fact grow. So we have gone to a more sustainable approach to the counter-VEO approach. And the last thing I'd say on this is a lot of times it doesn't always have to be what sometimes is thought of as a kinetic finish. It doesn't always have to be the warhead on the forehead to defeat this, but really it has to be an entire government approach, and it has to be ensuring allies and those partner nations are capable of defeating the threat.
You just got back from Somalia, one of those examples of where special operations forces are doing a lot of work trying to build indigenous capacity. Let's ask about Afghanistan, though. Do you believe the Taliban is a counterterrorism partner against ISIS?
Yeah. I don't see them as a partner. I'll just be frank. I think we have an interest from the U.S. perspective that the ISIS threat that is in Afghanistan is disrupted, that it can't roost, that it could actually affect one of our nations. But I wouldn't, as we look at the Taliban, I don't think they're an entity today that should be what you just referred to as a counterterrorism partner.
And so how do we tackle ISIS in Afghanistan if we can't work with the Taliban?
As I said in the first question, we build up amazing counterterrorism capabilities over the last 20 years. Some of those capabilities can still be used in Afghanistan today. We have to work with Afghans that still remain in Afghanistan to see and sense And then we have to work with regional allies of what they are picking up. There are still other embassies that remain in Afghanistan. There are still other intel threats. But the most important thing for us in Afghanistan is to ensure we understand the intel picture of where ISIS-K that exists there today actually is. And if it becomes such a threat that it could come back to the United States or could come to one of our allies and partners, we've built up capability. We can go to where the enemy is. We've proven that time and time again with the counterterrorism forces that all of us have built up. But all of our countries have unique special operations forces that have worked, integrated together for years. And I have no doubt that we can, in fact, defeat them.
So I've only got a few minutes before I open it up because we want to speed through things. So let's pivot a little bit to great power competition. Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen recently confirmed to CNN that a small number of U.S. forces are in Taiwan. Those are special operations forces. I know you can't provide specifics, so let me ask generally. What kind of capacities do special operation forces bring to Asia and our focus on China? And what could they bring in a hypothetical scenario where Taiwan might be involved?
Nick, and it's great to have my good friend Admiral Aquilino here from the Indo-Pacific. But what SOF provides, one, we're in numerous countries throughout the Indo-Pacific today. And in many of those countries that I've been to personally, we have been for decades. We have built up relationships with partners. And so you use the word pivot. I use the word rebalance. And I use the word specific to strategic competition. And so the SOF forces that have been in the Indo-Pacific really can focus on building partner capacity, looking at building resilient partners that we look at their training. We look at their interoperability to communicate internal. We look at how they could conduct medical and first aid so that we build up this resilience prior to conflict. And as one of my predecessors has said, is that you want to build a porcupine and make that porcupine so hard to swallow because you build up the resilience within that they're not even willing to take that bite. And that's really what deterrence becomes. But if they elect to take that bite, then you build up the infrastructure and the people that can resist and can actually fight back against someone. But first case, we don't want them to take the bite. We want to deter them through what we're doing. And this is the last thing I'd say on this. A really important aspect to everything that we do and all of us need to do is in the information space. Because today, so much misinformation and disinformation exist out there that sometimes it's hard to tell what the truth is. And I believe that we all need to counter that. We need to counter it appropriately and be first with the truth. But we also need to call out improper behavior that's against a rules-based order.
I don't suppose you care to share whether you believe that the Taiwanese forces are a sufficient porcupine to deter the PLA?
Yeah. Look, we'll continue to do what we need to do for the Taiwanese forces, but realize we stick within the Taiwanese Relations Act to make sure that, and what none of us hope for is any type of great power war.
And that is the effort across the region, right? I mean, it's not. I focused on Taiwan, but it really is a regional effort to build those porcupines. Right. Is that right?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Just one more topic, and then I'll open it up. As you've talked about, the Special Operations Forces community has gained incredible capacity over the last 20 years, integrated much more than it was 20 years ago, and yet there are still struggles with civilian casualties. Why?
Well, first, and it's not SOF specific, but any civilian casualty, we take the utmost within the United States to prevent that. I've personally been deployed multiple times. I've personally overseen kinetic type of strikes, and I can tell you, our people and the Joint Force, all of the U.S. military does its utmost to prevent that. But war is ugly. War is kinetic, and despite our best efforts, yes, sometimes there are civilian casualties. But we continue. We learn when mistakes are made, but we do everything to prevent them, which is in accordance with all of our values and the things that we bring.
And there was one incident revealed by the New York Times recently in Baghouz, Syria in 2019, the very end of the war in ISIS. It was a strike conducted by a special operations unit. Now, it's important the audience understands that strike is done within Central Command, who is fighting the war in Syria, and the investigation is in Central Command. But the experts I asked about recently, about that strike in particular, pointed out that there's a fear among these military watchers that special operations forces are too quick to call in airstrikes. So are they too quick to call in airstrikes?
Categorically, no. And categorically, no. We're taking, but every situation is different. And you can't compare one strike to another strike. But what I would say is that, no, we're not too quick, and we are deliberate. And like every, as you highlighted the Baghouz strike, we're going to pick it apart. We're going to continue to learn from those things, and we're going to make sure that the entire force understands what took place and share those best practices and where there are shortfalls.
And why are you so confident that no, you're not too quick, or Special Operations Forces units are not too quick to call in airstrikes? What are, just to share a little bit about what reassurance or what call it TTPs, I guess, what aspects of the tactics allow you to say so surely that we're not too quick?
Because there's structure in place with commanders that take it by a step-by-step process. And truthfully, I just witnessed this recently, where you're looking at where the potential, what the potential strike is. You're talking about what type of effects you're trying to achieve, what type of munitions you're going to use. Those are specifically picked out to minimize collateral damage or civilian casualties. And then eventually it's a commander in that loop who in fact makes that decision to do so. And one best practice that we've actually implemented and will continue to is you actually also have a red team that is watching that strike, that is questioning, is this the right thing to do, just to make sure that everyone is looking at it through, you don't get, what you try to do is avoid a confirmation bias or something. So having a red team, having an outside independent look is something that is being implemented for all these strikes.
Good. We've got only 5 minutes, so maybe we can get a couple questions in. Let me turn to this side first. I saw that hand first, and then I'll come back over to this side, promise.
Thank you. Patrick Tucker from Defense One. Good to see you, General. In light of the retrograde in Afghanistan, the strategy that the U.S. military, I'm told, is relying on for counterterrorism targets in Afghanistan and elsewhere is called over-the-horizon capability, which, to my understanding, means limited forward observers, limited JTACs on the ground. Can you talk a little bit about the trade-offs of over-the-horizon strike capability versus the more permissive environment that you had? What should the public expect in terms of how effective over the horizon can be against counterterrorism targets? Thank you.
No, it's fair question. It's going to be harder. Anytime you have physical presence on the ground, it stimulates the enemy forces. You see and sense you're with partner forces. So it is going to be harder. However, as I spoke about previously, the unique capabilities that we built with airborne unmanned aerial vehicles, presence with Afghan partners, the ability to talk with them and continue to work with allies. It's going to be what we're going to continue to do. And while hard, we've done hard. And we can do hard, and we're going to continue to persist.
Let me look on this side of the room, sort of kind of in the middle with the gray mask there.
Hi, my name is Matthias Gebauer. I work for German magazine Der Spiegel. General, you were talking about the strategy which has also been valid for Afghanistan to train with local partners. And that's what the US military did. They built up a strong network of special forces, Afghan special forces called commandos. From your point of view, in the aftermath of the fall of Kabul and the whole country, how could it happen that especially these forces played no role standing up against the Taliban? They just vanished. And maybe also the question, where did all these men go? Did you follow up where your partners went, or where did they vanish to? Thank you.
No, thanks. Some of those partners left Afghanistan as part of the retrograde, but many of them did remain and remain in Afghanistan. And it goes back to the earlier panel and the discussion of the connection of the military and building the military so it has a connection to the government. And then once the government of Afghanistan that was in support of all of those forces fell apart, where there's then no further logistics, no further pay, no further weapons or ammunition coming to them. Without that hope and without that backbone, they did not resist against the Taliban after it was evident that it was a losing proposition.
Just as a follow-up, do you believe that the fall of the Afghan military questions the very ability of the United States to create a sustainable indigenous force elsewhere?
No, I don't, because I think, but you have to tie in, the whole aspect, and I think we should reflect on what we built. And use the lessons learned for what we build in the future, depending upon the security needs of that country and the sustainability of those partner forces that we are part of. And we have to make sure that we honestly look at that.
I think we have time for one more. I think we got one hand there. Yeah.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, General. My name is Carlos Vecchio, an ambassador from Venezuela in the United States. So I would like to ask you the following, General. In your view, in your opinion, what is the main threat against the United States coming from Latin America or from this hemisphere? You know, take into account the presence of China, Russia, and of course, the undermining of democracy in some of the countries in the region. Thank you.
Thanks, Ambassador. And I recently had the opportunity to go down to Colombia and spend some time down there with our special operations forces in the region who are doing a tremendous job. From a threat perspective, military always looks at most likely and most dangerous. And I do, from a special operations command perspective, always look at I look at the most likely as some type of violent extremist attack inside the United States. And some of that could be directed and by the violent extremists, but sometimes, as we've seen, it could actually just be inspired. And I think it's really important that all of us look at what type of attacks and those threats. So I do still see that as the most likely. I do think that the most dangerous is the long-term type of conflict that we could have with a strategic competitor if, in fact, some type of misstep or mistake is made that puts us into that. And that's what we're trying to prevent each and every day with our forces that are resident, today, while we're sitting here, we have forces in over 70 countries that are exactly out there to be able to look at that and see what the threats are and work with every single one of our allies here And I think that's an important step in preventing both of those type of attacks. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you, and thanks to you, General Rich Clarke. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Nick. Good seeing you.